Здравствуйте, дорогие ребята! Дистанционная образовательная программа, по которой мы начинаем занятия, это замечательная возможность не только попрактиковаться в восприятии английской речи, но и узнать много интересного. Программа «Обо всем на английском» Центра «Радость» познакомит вас с интересными фактами из истории мировой культуры. Ваш английский лексикон будет расширяться под звуки классической музыки и в знакомстве с шедеврами мирового искусства. Будет хорошо, если в ходе занятия вы начнете повторять как знакомые, так и новые для вас слова, фразы и выражения. Занятия составлены так, что для этого у вас будут все возможности. И еще несколько слов о правилах участия в проекте. 2 раза в месяц по воскресеньям вы будете получать ссылку на новое видеозанятие, которое можно смотреть в любое удобное время. Главное, во время просмотра не забывайте регистрироваться в анкете Google формы, ссылка на которую находится в описании ролика. Видеозанятия разделены на циклы. После просмотра каждого цикла из 4-5 занятий у вас появляется возможность потренироваться в прохождении тестирования на английском языке, повторить знание новых слов, терминов, выражений, ответить на вопросы на английском языке. Тестирование можно проходить трижды для достижения наилучшего результата. Пройдя тесты всех 4 модулей программы, вы получите итоговый сертификат «A Fencer of Beauty», что значит «ценитель прекрасного». Итак, прямо сейчас найдите в описании видеоролика, который смотрите, ссылку на анкету Google формы. Кликните по ней и заполните ячейки. А сейчас начнем наше путешествие в мир английского языка. So, dear friends, an exciting journey into the world of art and creativity is waiting for you.
Myth, adventure, peoples, distort, punishment, papyrus, parchment, chaos, divine, Olympians, muse, recover, school curriculum, extent, hymn, golden-breasted, slope, serpent python, laurel wreath, jury, remote ancestors, literacy, plucked, dampen, inspiration, involved, inevitable death, nymph, revive, attempt, splendid, landscape, overwhelming, struggle, justice, disagreement, misunderstanding, demigod, disorder, barbarism.
Hello, dear friends! Welcome to our program. Today we are going to talk about myths. Most likely you already know some of the myths. You have probably read stories about the deeds of Hercules and the adventures of Odysseus. You have seen pictures and sculptures with myth heroes. Some of you even know comic books or have played computer games with characters from the myth. What are myths? The word myth was born in Greece and means speech, story in Greek. Myth is often confused with a fairy tale. In a fairy tale, just like in a myth, nature, plants and animals behave like people. But the tale is told either for entertainment or for teaching somebody a lesson. Nothing is explained in these stories. And the more unusual the storyline, the more interesting it is to the listener. So, a fairy tale is an invented cautionary tale. And what about myth? Myth tries to explain the unknown, to help people understand and form a view of the world. So, a myth is a story that gives people an idea of the world, its origins, gods, heroes, and people themselves. For a long time, Greek myths were known mainly in Europe, but after the Age of Discovery, Europeans got to know Asia, America, Africa, and Australia, and it turned out that those peoples also had myths. Some peoples had sacred myths, and retelling them it was important to be very attentive and not to distort even a small part of the text. The punishment was very severe. As culture developed, people started to write down stories about gods and heroes. It is amazing that similar images and stories can be found in the myths of peoples who live thousands of kilometers and hundreds of centuries apart. We will see how it is when we travel through the myths of the peoples of the world. Our today's heroes believed that the earth, they called it Gaia, came out of chaos. Gaia gave birth to the sky, Uranus, and together they had many children, but as divine as they all were, they were not a happy family. Gaia and Uranus always quarreled with each other, with their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all wanted to rule the world. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren won and took power. These gods were called the Olympians, after Mount Olympus, where they lived.
Today, we're going to travel to ancient Greece. Ancient Greece begins in the year 1200 BC and ends in the year 146 BC. It was founded in southeastern Europe near the Mediterranean Sea and the Aegean Sea. In this area, which included a large peninsula and many small islands, the Greek civilization was born and developed. This civilization was made up of a lot of cities called polis. The most powerful were Sparta and Athens. Each polis governed itself and was independent of the rest. The ancient Greeks were polytheists. They believed in many gods. Greek mythology is full of mysterious stories and legends. The most powerful god was Zeus, lord of lightning, and next to him there were many others like Poseidon, the god of the seas. In Greek mythology, there were also heroes like Hercules and Achilles, and strange beings like minotaurs and mermaids.
We live in the society where music is played all the time. We need music to tell stories, to celebrate, to work, to express our love, to dance. And we also play music and sing. Thousands of years ago, the people of ancient Greece loved music too. Just think back to the myth to make sure of that. The ancient Greeks believed that the creativity was the result of the divine influence of the muses.
In the most common versions, the muses were the 9 beautiful daughters of Zeus, and Mnemosyne, a Titanide who was the deity of memory. Each muse had her own task. Calliope, the most famous among the muses, was accountable for eloquence. The word was her gift. Melpomene was the muse of scenic arts associated with tragedies. In turn, Thalia was attached to comedy. Terpsichore was the music of dance. Clio, the muse of history. Euterpe is associated with lyric arts. Polyhymnia inspired the art of storytelling. Urania was connected to astronomy. Erato was associated with erotic poetry. Artists of ancient Greece prayed and offered sacrifices to the muses. They did it to benefit from the influence of the deities through which their arts could become true masterpieces.
The ancient Greeks, when seeing their friends off on a long journey or blessing them to a great deed, often said, "Go, and may the muses be with you." It is not wonder that the word muse is so similar to the word music. Music in Greek means the art of muses. Poetry, dancing, and singing were accompanied by music. Theatrical performance of the time included a choir of 12-15 people who accompanied the performance with singing and dancing. Historical events were narrated through song, and the study of astronomy was also related to the same principles as musical harmony, that each planet produced its own unique sound on its way through space. The ancient Greeks regarded singing, playing instruments, composing, and improvising were obligatory subjects in the school curriculum. The word uneducated was explained by the Greeks as one who cannot sing in a choir. What did ancient Greek music sound like? A great many monuments of architecture, sculpture, and literature have come down to us. But how ancient Greek music sounded has long been a mystery, even to scientists. But that all changed a few years ago. In 2013, a professor at Oxford University in England decided to restore ancient Greek music. The researchers carefully studied and reconstructed ancient Greek instruments, the aulos and the lyre, and it became clear how exactly they sounded and how to tune them properly. It turns out we can learn a lot from extant fragments of ancient instruments, drawings on vases and frescoes, and literary descriptions. The next step was to recover the melody. This was the most difficult part. The fact is that the ancient Greeks used letter notation. Each letter was a note, and the notes were written in the second row above the lines of the text. Only in the middle of the 19th century, scientists finally guessed the secrets of this notation. The manuscript survived in the form of fragments on papyrus, parchment, and in the form of wall paintings. About 60 fragments were found in all. The music of a hymn of praise in honor of Apollo was recorded on the stone from Delphi. Listen to what the music recorded in ancient Greece sounds like. What do myths have to do with it, you might ask? Myths were the first sources of knowledge about musicians, musical instruments, and the first musical competitions. Here's the golden-breasted god of light, patron of the arts, and the most beautiful god of Olympus. Apollo was also the leader of the Muses, one of the most beloved and honored gods of the ancient Greeks. In honor of Apollo, the Pythian Games were held in the temple at Delphi, a city on the slope of Mount Parnassus. According to Greek mythology, Apollo himself set up the games by defeating the monstrous serpent Python. At the outset, the Pythian Games consisted only of musical events, singing with the accompaniment of the ancient Greek instruments. Later, kart races and horse riding were added, with an apple and a laurel wreath as prizes for the winner. The Pythian Games can be considered the remote ancestors of modern music competitions. Apollo himself took part in a musical competition. One day, the goddess of wisdom Athena invented a new musical instrument, the aulos. Music literacy. Aulos means air in Greek. It is one of the oldest wind instruments. Aulos was a classical instrument in an ancient Greek theater. Ancient Greek musicians almost always played the double aulos and very seldom the single aulos. A similar timbre can be heard from the modern oboe, which is similar to the ancient instrument in its construction. Athena threw Aulos down from Olympus to earth. There he was picked up by Saturn, a cheerful woodland god with goat's feet named Marsyas. After a couple of months, fame spread throughout Greece as Marsyas the musical. Marsyas was so proud that one day he decided to challenge Apollo, who played the lyre. Music literacy. The lyre is a string-plucked instrument. The technique of playing all antique lyres was almost the same. The musicians held the instrument at an angle of about 45 degrees to the body and produced the sound with a bone or a metal plate. They dampened free strings with the fingers of his free hand. But talking about the musical instrument used by professional participants in public competitions, they usually mentioned cithara. Only men usually played the cithara. Challenging Apollo to a contest, Marsyas was sure that the wind instrument would definitely beat the string instrument, and Apollo accepted the challenge. The god of art began to play a melody on the lyre. Marsyas repeated it on the aulos with fancy and creativity. The muses invited as a jury could not award victory to any of the contestants. Apollo then suggested a second round of competition to play an instrument and sing at the same time. Marsyas suffered a crushing defeat and was severely punished. The first music competition ended tragically, and the lyre became Apollo's constant companion, his attribute as well as a symbol of poetic inspiration. The lyre was used to represent the Ido, ancient Greek poets who retold the myths in their own words at feasts and parties. The most famous epic poet of ancient Greece was Homer, the creator of the most ancient Greek poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Greeks believed that playing the lyre creates emotional balance. Maybe that's why modern musicians also reconstruct ancient lyres and play music that isn't ancient at all. Watch the video and count how many types of lyre were involved in the performance. The most attentive have noticed that there were 6 types of lyre, 1 harp, and an antique percussion instrument, very similar to a tambourine, called tympanum, to play the melody from the film Star Wars. We watched a story about modern performers. Who was the most famous ancient Greek performer on the lyre? Orpheus, of course. Orpheus was Mozart of the ancient world, the famous sweet-voiced master of words and music. He was the son of the muse of epic poetry Calliope and, according to some myths, Apollo himself. Orpheus played in the company of 8 aunts muses on Mount Parnassus, and it was there that Apollo, who adored him, gave his son a golden lyre and personally taught the child to play it. Orpheus spent spent days practicing his skills. The famous Jason, setting out in search of the golden fleece, took Orpheus on his boat Argo. Legends say that the singer twice saved the Argonauts from inevitable death. Once, when their ship sailed past an island of sirens, those birds with female heads began to sing so charmingly that many of the sailors, forgetting everything in the world, wanted to jump overboard. But Orpheus sang, and his voice proved to be more powerful and beautiful than the cunning songs. The sirens were silent within the sounds of his voice, and the Argo crew safely passed the island and continued their way. Another time, when the travelers almost reached the Black Sea, two rocks called the Cyclades stood in their way. These rocks immediately closed when a ship or a bird passed between them. No sailor had ever been able to pass these rocks, but Orpheus began to play and sing. The Cyclades listened to the song over the sea in amazement, unable to move. To this day, they still stand motionless. Do you think the music we're listening now tell us about the sirens or the rocks? We are listening to a fragment from Claude Debussy's symphonic work, The Sirens. This French composer lived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but was very fond of ancient Greek myths and often referred to them in his work. Listen to the waves splash and the magnetic voices of the siren. The most touching and sad story that has come down to us from ancient Greece is that of the tender love between Orpheus and nymph Eurydice.
It was the perfect wedding, the guests thought. The groom was Orpheus, the greatest of all poets and musicians. The bride, Eurydice, a wood nymph. Anyone could tell the couple was truly and deeply in love. Suddenly, Eurydice stumbled, then fell to the ground. By the time Orpheus reached her side, she was dead, and the snake that had bitten her was slithering away through the grass. Following Eurydice's funeral, Orpheus was overcome with a grief the human world could not contain, and so he decided he would journey to the land of the dead, a place from which no living creature had ever returned, to rescue his beloved. When Orpheus reached the gates of the underworld, he began to strum his lyre. The music was so beautiful that Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guards the dead, lay down as Orpheus passed. Charon, the fairy captain who charged dead souls to cross the river Styx, was so moved by the music that he brought Orpheus across free of charge. When Orpheus entered the palace of Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the dead, he began to sing. Hades and Persephone granted Orpheus's plea, but on one condition. As he climbed back out of the underworld, he must not turn around to see if Eurydice was following behind him. If he did, she would return to the land of the dead forever. Orpheus began to climb. With each step, he worried more and more about whether Eurydice was behind him. He heard nothing. Where were her footsteps? Finally, just before he stepped out of the underworld and into the bright light of day, he gave in to temptation.
The myth about Orpheus and Eurydice is a story not only of the power of love to overcome death, but also of the overcoming power of music. This idea has attracted composers for centuries. It is not surprising that one of the first operas, the opera by an Italian composer Jacopo Peri, is called Eurydice. The work was performed in 1600 in Florence and revived the tradition of of ancient Greek tragedy. Although Eurydice was not a typical opera yet, rather a drama set to music, it encouraged another Italian composer, Claudio Monteverdi, to write an opera called Orpheus. Orpheus was staged in 1607, only a few years after Eurydice, but it was already closer to the genre of opera. 150 years later, the myth of Orpheus attracted the attention of the composer Christoph Willibald Gluck. In 1762, he composed the opera Orpheus and Eurydice, the most popular and widely performed music. Together with Orpheus in search of Eurydice, we find ourselves on the banks of the river Styx. Our hero is blocked by the ruthless Furies, the goddess of revenge. The scene of Orpheus with the Furies is the most interesting and innovative in the opera. This is a dialogue between the terrifying Furies and complaining Orpheus. The opposition of the two clearly contrasting spheres symbolizes the conflicts between man and fate. Listen to an extract from Act 2 of Orpheus and Eurydice by Christoph Willibald Gluck and pay attention to the techniques that the composer uses to describe the Furies. The powerful singing of the choir with one voice against the sounds of the strings, smooth movement, simple clear rhythms, acute harmonies, gloomy orchestral colors. But what is it? The more persistently Orpheus asks, the Furies could not resist the magical power of Orpheus' art and are filled with sympathy for his destiny. And so the Furies disappear, and we can see a splendid landscape. Eurydice appears, accompanied by heavenly shadows. A flute solo plays. This is one of the most beautiful themes in classical music. It is often arranged for different instruments as Gluck's melody. Unlike the myth, the opera ends with a happy ending. It is the will of the gods that Eurydice comes alive again. Orpheus, Eurydice, and Cupid praise the overwhelming power of love and the wisdom of the gods. As we can see, the myth about Orpheus has attracted many musicians of the past and still does. Today you can also hear the fantasy opera Orpheus and Eurydice forever. Centuries and millennia have passed. Styles and trends in music have changed, but the eternal themes of the magic power of art, wholehearted loyalty, and the human challenge to fate still resonate in people's hearts. Today we have visited the world of the myth of ancient Greece. Of course, this is only a drop in a huge ocean of ancient Greek stories. So why, almost 3,000 years later, do we still turn to them? These are very interesting stories, and any educated person should have an idea about them. Because many pictures are painted, sculptures are created, musical and theatrical works are composed and written on mythological plots. And though many years have passed and we still face the same questions as the ancient Greeks did, the struggle between good and evil, the importance of justice and friendship, the questions of life and death. And when we read the myth, we understand that despite conflicts, disagreements and misunderstandings, the god, demigods and men all together oppose monsters and giants, struggle against disorder and destruction, barbarism and chaos, and in the end bring goodness, harmony and beauty to the earth. We hope that these worlds will bewitch you as they have enchanted us, and that you continue your journey through the myths by reading the books and watching our programs. And may the muses be with you